This is the Freeheel Life podcast number 19. I'm your host, Josh Madsen, coming at you from the Freeheel Life shop in Salt Lake City, Utah. And we are here today with another episode. And today we're going to get a little gear nerd on you and dive into some new product that's going to be coming out next week. So super psyched about that. Trying to kind of mix these gear ones in so you're not absolutely dying every week listening to the Nerd Fest. But hopefully last week you checked out Keith Calhoun, who was one of the second generation late 70s Crested Butte Telemark skiers that was part of an incredibly important group, in my opinion, that kind of helped revamp Telemark skiing and were some of the first ones modifying their boots with plastic cuffs. And to hear that whole story, you should go check it out in episode 18. So as far as newsroom and notes for today before we get started, there's a new first look piece that I put up on telemarkskier.com about Meidjo 3.0, which is what we're going to be discussing today. And it's live on there. You can check it out. There's some photos of some of the changes and a first look breakdown of the entire binding from M Equipment. So check that out. Up on our YouTube page, the last lowdown of the season with Taylor Johnson is live on the YouTube page, or you can find it on the Freeheel Life Instagram TV. Also, new vlog up from World Telemark Day. We finally got that done from when we went up to Pebble Creek right before the season kind of abruptly ended. And we did a little demo up there and participated in the annual Pebble Creek Telemark Festival in southern Idaho, just outside of Pocatello, which was pretty awesome. So lots of stuff to check out. We've obviously got a little more time on our hands, so we're pumping out a bunch of content and super psyched because there's quite a bit of fun stuff that is going on and stuff to look forward to next fall. So today's episode, we're going to be talking about the M Equipment's Meidjo 3.0 and kind of do a first look podcast look at it with Craig Dostie. And we'll welcome Craig back. How you doing, buddy?
Awesome. I just wish I were on the slopes talking to you.
I know. Yeah, I know. It's strange things are afoot at the Circle K, as they say.
Yes.
So Craig and I are going to dive in. We both got a hold of the Meidjo 3.0, and we're going to kind of give you guys a podcast version of our first look. We obviously haven't seen each other since this thing arrived at our respective houses, but we've both had a chance to get on it, check it out, and we're going to kind of talk you through it. So I thought a good place to start would be, Craig, if you can give us kind of a brief rundown on Meidjo as a binding, sort of like how many years has this thing been around, and in your estimation, how many variations have existed? Because I think you were actually probably the one that gave the first 0.1.2 system.
Oh yeah,
back in the first.
Yeah. Officially there's 3 versions, but I would say realistically, without keeping track of every single detail, there's probably 4 or 5. But the first probably 3 versions were all considered version 1. There was version 1.0, I guess. I remember labeling it 1.1 after that, and then 1.2. So there's kind of like 3 versions right there. But, it's kind of like software updates. There's a major revision, and then there's minor revisions. So figure maybe 3 minor revisions to version 1, then 2 revisions to version 2. So there's version 2.0 and 2.1. and now we're coming up on version 3.0. And so what are the differences on all of those? With version 1, let's see. Well, here's the thing. It came out, I first reviewed it in 2015. I think I received a binding to test in fall of 2014. So by the time Meidjo 3 comes out, potentially it's a 6-year-old design. And of course, I'm sure Pierre was working on it for at least 2 years prior to that. So it's been in his head for almost 8 years, maybe longer. Hard to say for sure. But here's the thing. It's the main points of Meidjo are it was the first Telemark binding with a low-tech 2-pin toe and an NTN connection. And Pierre kind of jumped ahead of everyone on this thing in that not only was he going for an NTN connection, he went for step-in. And when it first came out, I thought that he put too much emphasis on it, and maybe he did in some ways, because the Achilles heel of Meidjo is the red stub, which is what jacks the NTN claw up so that it will allow you to easily step in. And it's also what pushes the claw back so that it stays out of the way and doesn't grab your second heel when you're touring. It's definitely an ingenious design, but that red stub, the jack stand, is the fatal flaw of Meidjo as well, because it creates a cavity underneath the claw, which is you may generally call the spring box, where the springs are housed and where the claw is at the end. Anyway, that red stub tucks into a cavity, but that cavity is always there. And we just know from all kinds of other examples, the Rudderfella Free Ride, Freedom, just to name 2 right off the top, and there's others. Okay, if you have a cavity where snow can collect on a binding, it will.
Yeah.
and so that's the problem with Meidjo, is there's these permanent cavities, one created by the red stub that you jack the thing up so you can step in, or to keep the spring box held back. And so just snow collects there. There's almost no way around it. That's not totally true. You can put anti-ice tape on the walls underneath the spring box, and that will minimize the ability for snow to cling, but it won't prevent snow from being trapped there.
Right.
So you can minimize it, but you can't totally eliminate it. Anyway, so let's get back to these different versions. So version 1, Pierre came up with some really cool things, but they just didn't fly. One of the things he did was he came up with a mechanism to switch between tour mode and ski mode. And the idea was that instead of having to lift up the toe lever to lock the arms, the pins around your toe, it was a different sort of mechanism that blocked the pins from opening up. Okay. And I thought it was very cool, but it was a little too complex. And the reality is it didn't quite work. Not because the locking mechanism didn't necessarily work, but there were some other things going on in the design that there was some elasticity within the springs and within the arms that even blocking it didn't eliminate that. So version 1.1 or 1.2, I forget exactly which one it was, he eliminated that really cool mechanism, which was at the front of the toe, and just made it a simple lift the toe lever up to lock it like any other Dynafit style toe works. So that was probably the major difference between 1.0 and either 1.1 or 1.2. The other thing he did in that, well, now I'm getting confused myself because there's so many little changes, right? And exactly where did which one occur? That first version, he had 2 bent wires which acted as bumpers for the front of your toe off the arms of the pins.
Oh, right. Those smaller ones.
Yeah. So he replaced those and just machined bumpers. And I think that was version 2 that change occurred. Yeah, I'm pretty certain. But it might have been version 1.2 as well. Okay. Because the problem is those bent wires that he put in, they would fall out. Yeah. And there was a bunch of other little things that occur, like the pins that hold the arms in place that it pivot around, those would come out. So probably the biggest thing that occurred between the various versions of 1.0, 1.1, 1.2 is Pierre progressively realized that he needed to improve the manufacturing process so that things couldn't fall apart, because they were. Pins were sliding out and arms were coming off and bumpers were coming off and the flexor plate was coming off. All these things were coming off because pins were sliding out from vibration. And so he had to change his manufacturing process to lock those in place.
Yeah,
and he did.
In version 1, you remember it had that it also had that sort of rubber piece that went against the arm to kind of give it that softer ending to the turn. Do you remember that? That fit under, there was kind of that little cupping thing that went over the metal arm that goes back to the springs, and it was kind of like a rubber bumper inside.
Oh yeah, that was version 1.2 or something like that. And
yeah,
that was on the cable where the cable was held down.
Yeah, yes. Exactly. Yeah. And then obviously the mounting pattern changed from the 1 version to the 2 version, where it went wider with a wider base plate. So
Yep. So that was unfortunate, but I mean that needed to happen, and Pierre made the changes to make that happen. And I think overall, here's the thing, these are human design products, and we're not perfect, so we don't get it right the first time. But Pierre's stuck with it, and each version has been a worthwhile improvement. Has it been good? So much of an improvement that you should get the upgrade? I would say from any version of 1 to version 2.1, yes, absolutely. From version 2.1 to 3.0, I think it's less compelling, although I would say it's still compelling. Okay, but version 2.1, I think is a pretty solid binding. It skis great. I mean, I think we can all agree on that. I think the thing that Meidjo woke us up to, and Outlaw as well, was having a faster engagement. I remember years ago, I commissioned some engineering students at the University of Washington to do some tests to see if they could produce curves indicating the increase in tension as you lift your foot with a Telemark binding, as you lift your heel. Because it was my belief, but I didn't really have any proof, that the sensation of how active a Telemark binding felt was all determined like in the first 3 degrees of heel lift. And the problem was what I had for the ability to measure that. I couldn't measure it with a fine enough scale. And these guys were able to make measurements every 10th of a degree. And they absolutely conclusively prove that the more active bindings, for instance, Hammerhead, okay, compared to, say, Outlaw, no, compared to Free Ride or the Switchback or Black Diamonds '01 or what else was active back then? Oh, the Targa. Okay, all those bindings, the less active bindings engaged slower. The increase in tension on the spring was slower to ramp up, and it was very evident within the first 1 degree. It was kind of amazing. Anyway, with Meidjo, suddenly we went from seeing a change in that tension in the first 2 or 3 degrees to actually absolutely 100% in the first degree. And I think that's the main thing that Meidjo brought to the table. I mean, besides the obvious 2-pin touring efficiency and an NTN connection, the combination of those things yielded relatively instant engagement. If it's not instant, you can't really discern that it's not instant. It feels instant all the way. Okay.
Yeah. And I think that activity, I actually did a video on that for our YouTube channel not too long ago, talking about the difference between activity and spring stiffness, because I think oftentimes people confuse those two things, and they think that a stiff spring, or they think activity rather is stiffness in terms of where your pivot point's at activating. So that brings up a good point. I agree with you. I think, the way that it engages, I personally like how bindings that are second heel connection but have a nice flex plate work like that, because like the Free Ride from Rotofella did not do that, because the pivot point was so far forward, it was pulling from the second heel, but it wasn't activating until it got to where the pivot point was, where the cables connected. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no. The problem is, the the cable pivot location on the Free Ride was so far forward, you didn't really feel any increase in tension to balance against until your heel was up, and I'm just throwing a figure out, and it's not precise, but say between 5 and 10 degrees, your heel was lifted. And that lack of tension people call a dead zone, which right. I agree, or a dead spot. And I mean, if you're, making aggressive turns and changing leads very quickly, you don't feel it. But if you're doing a slow transition, there's this zone where you don't feel any tension on your heel. And so that's what's going on there. And the thing with Meidjo, generally with NTN bindings where the cable pivot is further back, so that's Meidjo, Lynx, and Outlaw, okay, you feel the engagement very quickly, almost, I would say, instantaneous. And the differences between them are very, very subtle, okay? And that's what it brings to the table. And yet Meidjo is not overly active because it doesn't have a really strong spring tension, but yet it kicks in quick, and then it's like it's steady. It's just there. And that's what people like about it. That's what's wonderful about it. Okay.
Well, and it should be noted too that of all of the NTN offerings, I think the cool part about Meidjo is that it actually does have more spring options with more settings than any of the other bindings. And you can actually, the other thing I think that highlights the Meidjo over a lot of other things is the fact that Pierre was able to separate releasability from spring tension. So like that I think is futuristic in my opinion, because if you could the idea with Free Ride when Rotofella came out with it is if you stiffen up your spring, you're less likely to come out in terms of release. But the thing with Meidjo is you can actually rock a stiff binding by cranking your springs down to a high setting, but you can leave the release light. So from a backcountry perspective, I think that's good. It's safer. You're more likely to come out in a catastrophic fall. So sometimes that gets overshadowed, but I actually think that's a feature that, release is like an entirely different million podcast probably. But I think that's one of the features that Pierre, at least thinking on that level, is pretty far ahead of the game.
No, he did a great job, and to have that independent is awesome. I mean, it isn't totally independent, okay, because that the ability to release laterally is less likely to happen when your heel is raised because there's a whole lot of tension on the whole system.
Right.
Okay. And, but nonetheless, the lower your heel is, the less tension there is just kind of holding you in that end-to-end connection. And so it's possible for the wings on the claw to open up, and how easily they open up is independently defined by a separate spring, which I think is absolutely fantastic. The only problem with that is this comes back to the snow cavities and snow collecting, and just Meidjo is one of those bindings that it has places where snow gets trapped, and one of them is the claw when you're touring. And part of the reason the snow is trapped in the claw when you're touring, there's no place for it to exit, because behind the claw there's this spring which blocks the snow from being able to leak out.
Oh, you're talking the release spring blocking it.
Yeah, the release spring.
Oh, yep. That's a good point. Yeah, it does pack in there and there's no out. That's funny. Yeah, I guess I never really thought about it like that.
Right. So if there were another way to do that release spring that allowed snow to escape out the back, there would be fewer problems with snow packing on the claw when touring. On the other hand, I mean, I just consider it's part of the procedure of switching from tour mode to ski mode with a Meidjo. You just got to take a moment and tip your boot forward and clean out the claw. And usually, there's some snow there. But as long as it isn't super sticky snow and you haven't been making a really long climb, it's not ice. It's just snow. And, you just flick it out with the tip of your pole pretty easily. And then you release the spring box with that wire that holds it in tour mode. And anything that's kind of left in there gets kind of shook out, and you step in and off you go. It's not that bad of a deal. But you do have to make sure you clean it out or check, is there snow packed in there? And the reality is, because it's kind of trapped, there's a very high likelihood that there is snow there, and hopefully it's not ice.
Yeah.
I consider it to be, every binding has some amount of maintenance that you have to do with it. I mean, I've even had snow get trapped with version 2 of the Lynx. So there's no perfect beast out there. And kind of like Taylor was saying in our previous podcast together, what's your favorite tech toe binding? Outlaw.
Yeah, that was pretty funny. We got baited into that one for sure.
We totally did. But it doesn't have, there's fewer maintenance problems. It's heavier. Yeah, okay, come on, let's stop whining about weight, all right? We get to Telemark and AT skiers don't. But let me get back to these differences on versions, because we kind of got sidetracked a little bit.
Yeah, no worries.
So almost all the changes in between version 1 and version 2, a lot of it was with the toe. So there were machined bumpers, machined out of the material that makes up the arms for the toe on version 2 and 2.1. The other major change that distinguished 2 from version 1 was the heel. I think there were a couple changes to the heel that Pierre made, so that the climbing post, well, number one, in the first version, it wouldn't stay upright. And then the spring that was supposed to hold it upright broke because it wasn't strong enough or the material wasn't good. But in version 2, Pierre was able to nail down that there was a hole in the top of the heel post, And again, it was a snow trap. So snow would collect in there, and it made it problematic. I mean, you might end up getting a heel post even when you didn't want one if you were touring in sticky snow, because it would collect in there and just kind of build up. So we got rid of that, made it a solid piece of plastic, and he changed the spring mechanism. So when you flipped it up, it stayed up. And he also put some wings on the side of the heel post, which made it easier to flip up. So that was a really good improvement, and he hasn't had to change that with version 3. The heel post is solid, okay? What else did he do with version 2? Well, he changed the toe lever so that he didn't have that fancy locking mechanism, and it was just a simple lift the toe lever and pull it back and have it go a couple of clicks to lock out the toes so it wouldn't open. So he did a good job with that.
Brakes also
And then
changed.
there were some minor changes to the spring box, because the spring boxes in version 1 were cracking and breaking. And what he basically did there was, anytime there was a corner, in version 1, it was a sharp corner, and that's where cracks would propagate. So he took every single corner in that 3-dimensional spring box and rounded it. And that significantly improved the durability. Now in version 3, he's gone in and he's modified the spring box again, but this time what he's done is he's using eco-friendly, non-petroleum based or less petroleum based plastic, but in the spring box, he's infusing it with more carbon, which just makes it a stronger spring box. And there's some very minor changes to the geometry that would evade the average person. And probably aren't that significant. So I won't even detail them.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say that's a pretty good version breakdown.
Yeah. And then the other major change with version 3 is the toe. And that toe, I mean, it's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think this is a perfect segue into that, is, more or less getting the basis of like where we've been with Meidjo and, where we ended this season. And then, like you said, right into the major changes, which I think if we work from the toe back, that's the most significant. And we were talking just before we got on the podcast about it, because I mean, it's actually pretty substantially different in terms of how it is getting into this. And I remember when you had got a hold of it before I did, and the first thing you said was there was no toe bumpers, and meaning those little, for the people out there that haven't had Meidjo, or maybe you have it, there used to be these things that Craig was talking about, where there's they're kind of a stopper, so it helps guide your toe into the proper place so the pins can click in. When you told me that, I was thinking, oh man, that's going to make it so much harder, because you were the person that always told me in the early days of tech, you're like, oh, you got to know the Dina fiddle. And I'm like, I don't want to know the Dina fiddle. I don't want to learn that. But,
yeah,
funny enough with the new Meidjo 3.0 toe, I mean, and I was telling you this before, but it's like, it doesn't have bumpers, but it's like, it is truly like a trap. Like, you start easing your toe forward, all of a sudden it just snaps onto your foot and perfectly in place into the tech settings. So yeah, pretty impressive, man. I from an ease of use standpoint, like, I know that's going to be a big selling point, for that thing.
Absolutely. I mean, I've seen it over the years. The biggest thing for people going from whatever, it's in the Alpine world too. Okay. But I think it's more pronounced with Tele, just because in the Telemark world, everyone's pretty dialed it. You kick your duckbill in and you bend over and you flip the heel lever up on your heel. Okay. Meidjo was a true step in. Okay. But you have to get into the pins first. And so with the early version and I would say every version of Tech Toe other than Meidjo 3.0, you kind of got to learn how to line up your toe and get in. And you don't have to do the fiddle dance as much as you do with a Dynafit, okay? But you do. There's a learning curve to getting in, okay? And throughout the tech toe world, the first impression that everyone has is how hard it is or is not to get in. And really, the first binding tech toe to come along that made getting into the toe truly easier was G3's Ion. I mean, I was blown away when I first tried that. And they were the first ones to come up with bumpers, alignment, tools that you would put the front of your toe against, and that would align your boot so that the inserts were aligned with the pins, and then you tap down and snap. It would close on your boot. And so Lynx uses a similar pair of bumpers, okay? And Meidjo originally had bumpers that were wires that were put in position on the arms, and then Pierre, made it. It was machined bumpers, okay, and those were good. If you rested the front of your toe against that and pressed down, you were in. It was solid. And like you mentioned, and I was disappointed when I first looked at it pulling out of the box. It's like, oh, there's no bumpers. How am I going to line my foot up? This is going to be harder. But Pierre changed the dimensions of the arms and how high they are above the base of the ski, all kinds of things, so that there's the lever arm is stronger when it closes. And all he did was put a very subtle white stripe across the toe lever that you line the front of your boot up with. But as you pointed out, Josh, you almost don't even need that. All you got to do is slide your toe in flat, and you can kind of see where the pins are in your insert. And you just do this subtle little tap down and wham.
Yeah.
It grabs your boot.
I didn't even see the white line you were talking about. I'll have to look at that, because that's what was funny is sliding it forward. It's almost like a trap. Like, it's like the minute my boot stops going forward, it just snaps on. Instead of, in the past, a lot of times I'd have to like line it up and then push down and wait for it to engage, So
yeah.
So do you know much? So he's moved to a single spring on each side, and do you know? I mean, is that what's doing that? And obviously the arms are different, like you talked about. Like, you can kind of see. I'll have to put some more photos up of that too, because you can really see the difference in how they machine the arms. They're kind of they're not quite vertical like they were. There's kind of an offset to them, which is interesting, but. That spring
the angle of the arms is different. Okay, if there's no boot there when you close it, they close even tighter, closer together. Okay.
Okay.
So it's a subtle thing, and Pierre explained it to me. There's a couple things going on. Let's start with the springs. Okay, so there was a 4-pack of springs, 2 on either side. Okay, now he's gone to a 2-pack, 1 on either side. And it's they are stronger springs. They're larger diameter, and in terms of the coil, and then they're also a larger diameter wire, which makes it a stronger steel. So the springs themselves are stronger. And Pierre's not the first to adopt 2 springs. In fact, there's some toe pieces come out of ATK in Italy where they're actually only using 1, or I take that back. None on one side and 2 on the other side. And then like Marker's Alpinist, which is now migrated to their Kingpin, it's the same kind of toe design as what Pierre has, where it's just 2 springs, 1 on either side. Okay, larger diameter springs, thicker wire. So they're much stronger springs. But the main thing Pierre did was he looked at Ion and recognized that a big part of the increase in the force that Ion creates and the mousetrap effect, the snapping tight really fast, was due to the arms being higher up off the base of the binding, or the top of the ski, than Dynafit. I don't know the exact numbers, okay, but just to give some idea, if the Dynafit arms are pivoting, say, a half inch above the base of the ski or the bottom of the binding, the Ion is pivoting like 3/4 of an inch above, and that difference makes it close a lot faster. So again, those numbers not exact. That's just to give some relative indication. Pierre did the same sort of thing relative to version 2.0 or 2.1. He raised the height of where the arms pivot in, but then he also correspondingly lowered the height of the arm. But the net effect is that as the arms go down in the center, there's more force, partly because the springs are stronger, and partly because it dips to a lower point, so there's more force in it. That's just what causes it to snap a lot faster. So he did a great job, and he even filed for a patent on it. So he considers it to be unique enough that he can patent it, and no one can precisely copy him.
Wow, that's crazy. Yeah, and the other thing too with those, I think worth noting is in the 2.1, there was still some clearance issues, I think, with the pins to current boots in terms of I think when you flexed forward, there might have been just millimeters of rubbing and stuff. So some people were trimming that away. And I think, so I think the way that he redid these arms and pins, there's less material on the inside that can interfere with that interface of pin going into the tech fitting. So
yep. And honestly, I think that's a manufacturing flaw on the part of the boot makers. There's some excess material that's left above the insert, and if you got one of those boots, just cut it off. You just get a pocket knife and cut that plastic off.
Yeah, just shave it off. Yeah, totally. Yeah, because it's funny because even and that's a little hack for sure, because that plastic doesn't do anything and it just gets in the way, especially once it gets frayed and stuff. It kind of can get in the way. So
yeah, well, and like you said, if your boot goes forward enough, that plastic can cause the arms to spread, which means you're going to pre-release. So you don't want that.
Yeah.
So
yep, good point. Yeah, push it. Yeah, right. Yeah, as you flex forward, it's actually pushing the arms outward.
Yep. So let's see what else on 3.0. Change the material on the Flexor. Oh, here's a point I got to make on the Flexor. So, yes, Meidjo has a lot of snow traps. Okay, but the one that a lot of people have missed, and I just got lucky. Okay, yeah, it was just one of those things. I said, well, let's try this. There's a cavity on the underside of the Flexor at the back, just where the dongle inserts into the spring box. Okay, it's like a trapezoidally shaped cavity.
Mm-hmm.
All you got to do is get some foam rubber and glue it in there.
We're gonna have to do a video to show people. They're probably like. So first off, just to clarify, when he's saying Flexor, he's talking about the flex plate that comes off the toe piece, and then that's the part that flexes under the ball of your foot. Just so we're staying consistent on the nomenclature of Meidjo, which God knows how many different names we've come up with.
Well, like the red stub. I call it the magic red stub. You call it the jack stand, whatever.
I call it the kickstand. Yeah.
The kickstand. Okay, the kickstand. Yeah. That's a good term for it. Right? Anyway.
So foam rubber filling that hole. Is it
right in that? Yeah, right in that trapezoidal cavity. Okay, put it in there with super glue. It'll smash down and become smooth over time, but just filling that reduces the amount of snow that gets trapped underneath when you're turning, even though there's still this huge cavity where that jack stand retracts into on the underside of the spring box. It doesn't capture it. It's like that's the magic spot on the flexor where it begins to grow. And so if you can prevent it from starting to grow and be caught there, it minimizes the snow being caught everywhere else underneath.
Yeah, no,
pretty amazing.
Yeah, and I think, being here in Utah, like usually lighter snow until you get to spring. Generally speaking, the buildup isn't too bad around here, but I have skied it in wetter conditions, and that's not good.
So that's very annoying.
Yeah, so maybe like a Sierra snow, like a maritime snowpack, or more spring kind of heavy snowpack. You got to watch out for the buildup for sure.
For sure. Anyway, that's a simple fix.
So that before we move too far back on the binding, just so people know, the mounting for 3.0 is the exact same as 2.1. So if you were going to change it over, you could either do an insert kit or, use the same holes, assuming that they're in good shape. So you wouldn't have to change that. Okay, so anything else on the toe? I guess we're already past the toe.
Yeah, I no, nothing more on the toe.
Flex plate. What's the material? The flex plate's now eco-friendly P-Bax, right?
Yeah, it's P-Bax Renew, which is the same plastic that's used on T2 Eco.
Oh,
as an example.
The Scarpa boot. Okay, cool. And then Springbox, you had mentioned earlier, has some carbon infused into the plastic for extra strength.
Yep. So it'll be less likely to crack and break. Oh, and then of course, there are ramps on top of the claw, so that if you haven't been touring, you're at a resort. Okay, you don't need to prop the Springbox up on the kickstand.
Right,
on the red stub
for the step-in function.
Yeah, you can just keep it flat, step in at the toe, which is much faster, and then you just step down on your heel, and those ramps push the claw back until your boot slides underneath, and then the claw grabs on. And it's quite fast and simple and easy, and much more convenient. You don't have to cock the thing and get it set.
Yeah, and that's kind of the annoying part, honestly. Like, if you're just throwing them out to go ski, and maybe you are in bounds using it. Yeah, I always that, especially showing people how to do that. It's like, okay, here you go. You got this new binding. You've got to lift it up and put the kickstand down, and now you can step in to the toe, and then you need to click down. Then you need to lean forward, and you'll hear a click, and it's the kickstand coming disengaged. Like, it was always kind of like a funny, it just seemed like a lot of excess. So I think this is fantastic that at least that portion of it he's gotten to go away with this step in, by just stepping down on the ramps. It opens up the second heel, connects it. But with that noted, in order to get the Springbox out of the way for touring, you still have to engage the kickstand, push it down, latch it.
Yep. And I mean, that's just the way it works. Okay. I don't see any easy way around that, but I think the fact that he modified it so that you don't have to prop it up just to go make turns, that's great. Because the reality is, most telemarkers spend most of their time inbounds. And so the touring function is still there. And if you got to cock it to get it in place and latch it, okay, that's just part of the process of putting it in tour mode. To me, that's not a major problem, because generally you don't go from making turns to skinning up without first taking your skis off to put the skins on. So while you're in that mode, you adjust the binding so it's in tour mode as well.
Yep. Yeah, honestly, it doesn't seem too far-fetched for now that he has that step-in box that he's going to come up with some sort of a resort-friendly toe that's less expensive, because that would I mean, if you think about it, like if you had that kind of a step in with just a regular cage toe, that'd be pretty cool. So.
Yep. And I've seen drawings that indicate he's working on that.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Those secret drawings that popped up on the internet one day. Whoever's posting those, you are a total weirdo. I just want you to know. and I love it. Only the Telemark world would do that. So, okay, so that takes us through the spring box. The springs are the same. You've still got single spring configuration, 2 spring configuration with the stock spring with the small spring inside, or the red line springs, which are the stiffest option. 5 settings on each of those. So that's a total of 15 different settings you could get out of that. And then the heel piece is identical to 2.1, sounds like.
Yep, heel piece is the same. So no need to improve that. And on the springs, this is my experience. I don't know what yours is, but the standard spring is relatively soft. When you double it up with an internal spring, in my experience, that's almost identical to the stiff spring by itself. Okay, so the only reason you'd want to get the stiff spring is because the standard spring plus the inner spring is not as tight as you would like it, not as taut. So if you get the red stiffer springs as the main spring, you're probably going to also want to double it up with the internal spring.
Oh yeah, so I guess that's even 5 more options because you can double up the internal with the red line spring.
Right.
Got it. Yeah.
Right. And then you adjust the thumb screws to the tension that you want. Which I mean he's got a scale 1 to 5, but the reality is it's more or less continuous. You can have 1.1 or 1.6 or whatever.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I think the major difference is just the combination of the outer spring by itself or an outer spring with an inner, and either the standard spring with an inner or the stiffy spring with an inner. So,
are you going 2 springs then?
I go 2 springs on the standard. It's the same as the stiffy. I suppose if I were a weight weenie, I would just use the stiffy without the inner spring. But
that's real weight. That's a real weight weenie.
I mean, like how many grams? I'm not going to notice the difference in weight. Okay,
you're obviously going to beat me up the hill if you take the inner springs out. Come on, that's how much faster you're going to be.
Right. Well, the only way I'm going to beat you up the hill.
I'm a slow hiker. I don't know what you're talking about.
Is to put something in your coffee that you don't know.
Yeah. Right. Oh man. Yeah. Okay. Well, I guess that's you got anything else you want to add on the breakdown?
No.
I think that's pretty thorough, kind of front to back of all that stuff. So
I'll add one thing.
Yeah.
This is such a good toe. I'd say it's in the same league as Ion, or I haven't done a side by side, but it might even be better. It's a damn good toe, tech toe in its own right, just as a tech toe.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I actually think that him infusing the carbon into some of his plastic parts, that's always been kind of my gripe too, is the whole thing having so many pieces and it's plastic. So him beefing those pieces up, I think that's a big step. And I mean, to be fair, there wasn't 2.1 did not have nearly as many issues as previous models. I mean, he's definitely worked a lot of the kinks out. So,
oh yeah.
Yeah, I'm excited, man. I think the 3.0 is going to be I think it's a worthwhile upgrade for people. Like you said, I mean, the skiing might not be a ton different, but the toe and the step-in features alone, I mean, I'm into that.
Yeah. And here's the thing. If you've been sitting on the sidelines waiting, okay, there's some really good options now. And I know a lot of you are like, look, there's nothing wrong with my duckbills. There is nothing wrong with your duckbills, but something better is available.
Yep.
And Meidjo 3 is very compelling. It skis great. It's much easier to get into. The tour's awesome. If you make the switch, you will not regret it.
Yeah, no, I like that. And and I'm glad you're echoing that sentiment on 75 millimeter too. I mean, like we keep saying, the best time, if you're gonna buy new boots, that's when you need to start thinking NTN in some fashion, just because the last thing, me at a shop wants you to do is drop money on new boots that nobody's going to ever make a new binding for. And, this will just give you, open up a different world, whether it's Lynx, Meidjo, Outlaw X, whatever variation you want. So,
yeah.
All right, my brother. Well, that was pretty awesome. I guess for everyone out there, much love for checking this episode out. As always, how you can support us and the work that we're doing is you can buy your Telemark gear from freeheellife.com. We've still got a number of things on sale, some boots still left, some skis left, lots of accessories, and there's a buy one get one free for t-shirts right now. Use the code SPRINGBOGO at checkout, and you can that's for shirts, hoodies, hats, drinkware, all that good stuff. Also, like we said, check out articles on telemarkskier.com. Craig and myself and a few others are pumping out new content on there. I'm also doing a bunch of YouTube videos right now, and we've got a lot of extra time, so I've been doing more on there, so stay tuned. Please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. That helps us out. And you can also email me at podcast@freeheellife.com with any questions that you want answered, or just to say hello. We'd love to hear from you, know where you're at, and what you're up to. So, Craig, thanks again for being on, brother. And
always great.
We'll do it again. So until next time, you guys, spread Telemark always.